hopefully, yeah, it's not going to be a problem time-wise for you today.
No, it's all good. I've got all morning.
Uh, that's cool. Yeah, yeah. What time is it your way now? You're
It
San
is.
Antonio, yeah?
Yeah, it's Central U.S. time, so just a few minutes past 9 a.m.
Oh, crikey! I've not got you up for this, have I? You'd have been working anyway,
No,
yeah?
no, no, no. Yeah, most mornings I'm up. I'm up and working for at least an hour by now.
Yeah. I just noticed you're on the MVP list answering an email. I thought, I hope he remembers. Got a little appointment coming up. Just, I
Yeah.
think, for me personally, I look at you and go, when do you stop?
Sometimes I think that myself.
Yeah, because
It's
you seem to be kind of everywhere, yeah, with answering questions or
yeah, it's I'm obsessive compulsive about that in a lot of cases, and I take breaks during the day sometimes. I don't work straight 8 hours. That's pretty painful to do, especially in the work from home environment. But I've been working from home for 15 years on and off, depending upon customer visits. So that's nothing new to me. And so I've gotten pretty good about, I don't know, calling it pretty good or not, but my routine is I try to break things up. I'll sit here for a few hours at a time, and then something at home will distract me, whether that's a game on TV, when United's playing,
never heard of.
or or whatever. The dogs need to go for a walk. The dogs need to get fed. The dogs need to go outside. I want to go eat. It's at home. You can allow those distractions as long as you're disciplined about coming back and working at some point.
It's been able to switch off, isn't it? To stop. If you've done that work from home thing for quite a while now, so you're kind of an expert at it. I would assume that, you know, it's not working all the time, but you're able to slip out and do things and change that quality of life a little bit more so than if you sat in an office 9 to 5.
Yeah, it's. I mean, with any person that's actually of value and contributing to their organization, right? Uh, they should have the leeway to determine how to best use their time. And if they're not, then they're not really of value to their organization. And so part of that is defining your own work-life balance. And sometimes it tips both ways, right? One day you need to work 12 hours. Okay, great. If your organization is intelligent, and not every line of business can do this, right? If you're in retail, you can't do this, right? There are certain constraints, but for what we do and for what a lot of office workers do, depending upon when their other office workers are trying to contact them. So I guess that's also a downside here, right? If we go back just 20 years, 25 years, no one worked at night. No one worked in the evenings because they couldn't collaborate with anyone. The ones at the office, how do you do any of this work? You might be able to do some research, and once again, it kind of depended upon your organization and what your organization did. But if you can't collaborate, if you don't have online resources and you're just at home, you can't do this. So, some would clearly argue, and I think the Germans are in this boat, right? And I think the French are going down this line as well, that if you can't get away from work, it's, not being connected and having emails ping you constantly, then the organization should be paying you or should have that stopped, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, I saw some conversations with the French around that. Yeah,
yeah, I'm pretty sure the Germans have passed some laws around it, right? Because I know I've dealt with a couple of organizations that were looking for ways to completely stop email after certain time periods, after 1700 or wherever, right? So
yeah, yeah. But I mean, this going back to what you were saying about collaborating and being connected. I mean, since March, this has been a huge boom, hasn't it? Obviously, with the COVID situation, the ability to do what we're doing, and the change in business to accept it, because I found that to be quite a barrier at times. It depended on the person, the management, and their outlook on home working, as to whether they were willing to accept it. Like you say, it depends on the business, doesn't it? The willingness of them to do it. Now it's enforced on them in a way, but effectively seeing that people are able to do it still. But I don't know about yourself. I mean, I've spoken to a few people with young kids, and that for them is, how do I do homework in? That's I could find that really really difficult. Kids of up to the age of maybe teen years where they have a bit more dependency on you. Um, that could be tricky. I've not had to experience that, thankfully, um, in an
Yeah.
intense way like you have had to do with this. So, but at least there's that acceptance that okay, you are at home with the kids more
Yep.
so than previously. So, Jay, oh, hold on, I'm knocking things over here. I've just stretched back there and knocked my lamp over. I'm just about to introduce you, so that's very professional of me. So, Jason Sandys, thanks ever so much for joining the Just a Couple of Jerks podcast this week.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk to folks.
That's cool. It's a pleasure. Um, so, Jason, yeah, you've been working from home for quite a while, but recently you've been working for Microsoft. How did all that come about?
Yeah, so I've, being around and in the industry, you get to know lots of people. So I'll call him a friend. I mean, he's been a friend for a long time. A guy I met in one of my original consulting gigs, who's been at Microsoft for a long time. He moved through a bunch of different jobs. And so, we struck up a friendship a long time ago. And as he moved his way up the chain in Microsoft, we always kind of loosely kept in touch. And then he took charge of a team. I think he's been on the team for about 3.5, 4 years now, maybe a bit longer. And he took control of the team about 2.5 years ago, I think. They had an opening, and he called me up. And so it was kind of like the job found me. It wasn't anything I, was out actively looking for. Although at the same time, based upon my career path, being a part of, and a lot of people will call it the mothership. I think that's kind of a weird term, but I think everyone has kind of heard it at one point or another. It was always something that, if an opportunity came up, I was certainly going to look hard at it, and this just seemed like the perfect opportunity. It fit in with me professionally big time. I think being a consultant was lots of fun for the most part. I learned tons. I got to do lots of cool stuff, but there's some things that really wear on you after a while. I mean, and every job has those kinds of things, right? When you're doing kind of the same things. So that's not to knock people that are consulting. It's just got to a point where, if something came up, and it did, right? It was divine intervention, divine timing, however you want to term it, because it wasn't anything I could have planned for or prepared for, but it just came kind of at a perfect time.
Yeah, fell at the right time, and it was the time
Yeah.
to do it. Yeah. So, how long had you been classed as a consultant for then? Prior to that?
Yeah, so I did, I did CT Global. That was just under 4 years. I did two stints at Catapult. The first was, I think, just under 5, and the second was just under 4. I did a stint of about 2 years at another local consulting company here early on. So whatever that adds up to, 11, like 15-ish. Yeah. Had a stint at a OEM in there for about 10 months. Got slipped in that I learned a lot in. Didn't work out in the end, but I learned a lot in and made some other good friends. Um, and then I was a
So, a
contractor.
fair amount of time.
Yeah, I was a contractor for about 5 years for the U.S. Air Force as well. So, and that was after I got out of the U.S. Air Forces. So,
So, when you say you got out of the U.S. Air Forces, in what capacity?
yep. So I was an officer in the Air Force. I had two different duty stations. My first was here in actually in San Antonio, um, and I did Oracle programming. It's way back in the day. So I led a team of developers doing some Oracle programming, which was a really kind of crazy project, way ahead of its time for what we were trying to do, and it mostly worked. It did all
Is this
right.
back in the 90s then?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a project that came about, and it was kind of crazy the stuff that we were doing. I mean, it was basically a lot of database replication on the back end. Between a lot of disparate locations across the globe because we actually have recruiting stations across the globe. It was working for recruiting services, and so there's recruiting places. Most of it clearly as here in the U.S., but we do actually have stuff in Japan and other places where we have large contingents of American troops, right? A lot of dependents end up joining the military as well. So, using dial-up lines to perform replication and of at the time, it was tens and hundreds of megs of data, but still using dial-up lines to do that
Yeah,
was an
it's all we had,
interesting
wasn't it?
chore. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So that was fun.
And was that jumping out of university, was it, to straight into that role?
Correct, right. So Uncle Sam, I think everyone knows the reference to Uncle Sam, paid for my university. And so that committed me for 4 years. And so after that duty station, I went on to Australia.
Okay.
I was in Australia for 2 years at a early warning station that is no longer there, um, out in the middle of nowhere. It was a joint operation between us, the Aussies, the British. It was technically uh, joint with the British and the Italians as well, although we only had uh, one person from Her Majesty's Royal Services while I was there, outside the Australians, right? Because the Australians are actually Her Majesty's services as well. So, so it was mostly Australians and Americans. It was an interesting time out in the middle of nowhere in Australia.
Yeah, definitely. So when you say out in the middle of nowhere, was it because pretty sparse at times in Australia? It really was in the middle of nowhere, yeah?
Yeah, so the largest city was near us was Adelaide, but Adelaide was a good 5 hour drive. So speeds in South Australia at the time, I think the speed limit was 110. So
Kilometers?
yeah, exactly. And so it would take about 5 hours. So you're talking, roughly around 500 kilometers away. There were a couple of other smaller towns near us, but no, yeah, it was interesting. It was a totally different way of life for sure, and lots of slower things. The Aussies in general they're a lot more laid back about everything, which was cool.
Yeah, yeah. So what was it? You say a totally different way of life. In what way? Can you expand on that?
Well, particularly it was a small town, right? And we didn't have children at the time. My wife and I had just gotten married. But even for the other Americans there, it was great because our little small town, you could literally walk from one side to the other in, I don't know, probably 20 minutes at most. So I mean, you're only talking a couple of square kilometers. All of 1,000 people or so total in this town, and nothing around it for hundreds of kilometers, pretty much. So um,
So
and
a
so
real
everyone
change for
kind of,
yourself
yeah,
to
exactly.
get used to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so people got to know each other. You got to meet different folks, and of course the interesting thing for all of 1,000 people, and I don't remember the exact number. There were something like 6 or 7 pubs, right, and that was the predominant local business. I mean, it was about half civilian and half military because the town itself, it was a what are they, a Commonwealth municipality. So it was actually run by the Commonwealth of Australia, right? And there was no like local elections. There was no nothing. I mean, it was literally a federated town. And so there was a town council that I was actually a part of. I got nominated by the facility commander to be on the town council for like a year. So I got to see some kind of, I mean, nothing was major, but it was just kind of interesting to be part of that. And, but to be in the town, you actually had to be employed by either the facility that we worked on or the town itself. Or one of the supporting things. You had to be approved to be in town. So if you didn't actually have a purpose to be in town, they would escort you out. Exactly. Uh, so that was kind of interesting. Um, and just the animals as well, right? That was, for most people in the world, right? It's very different animals, and they were around, right? I mean, kangaroos. We had emus walking down the street. There were kangaroos all over the place. Those were the two predominant ones, but they also had, I think one of the cooler ones is they had these things called these notchback eagles, and these eagles would land on the road, and they would land on dead kangaroos, right? I mean, and over here in the U.S. we have the normal roadkill with deer. I'm sure they have. I don't know if there's deer in the UK that roadkill, but we do here big time. Well, there it was all kangaroos because they were everywhere, and particularly in the winter months, they'd be attracted to the warmth of the road, and so they'd get close to the road and get hit by the trucks, right? And so these notchback eagles would land on these kangaroos, and just height wise, these eagles were 3, 4, 5 feet high, right? I mean,
Jeez.
a meter, meter and a half easy, and their wingspans were huge as well, and they wouldn't move. They would just, you would be come flying up on them in the car, and they wouldn't move. They would just stare at you. It
Was
was
it like a
just like,
standoff?
wow, exactly, and there were stories of what they could do with their talons. I'm sure their
Oh,
talons
jeez.
were
Yeah, yeah,
immensely
yeah.
powerful. So you
Yeah,
just
of
kind of
course.
avoided them. They were pretty crazy. And everyone was always afraid their dogs were going to get carried off and stuff. And there were stories. I mean, I don't know if it really happened, but there were stories of little dogs getting carried off too. So
Oh, jeez. Yeah, 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 yeah. God, these sound immense. I mean, we have little stories here about swans breaking your legs or whatever just by flapping their wings. But these eagles sound horrific. I'm gonna have to check them out.
yeah,
Uh, Take a look. So, will they just kind of just stand there then? You kind of just stop the car and wait for it to go, or go around it, or
yeah,
whatever.
you'd go around it. You'd slow down and go around it because there were also stories of them coming through windshields and stuff too. So
Oh, Jesus
um,
Christ.
yeah, once again, I don't know how true any of those stories exactly were, but it's not one of those that you really wanted to mess around with. So.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about little poisonous spiders, but these eagles sound horrific.
Well, yeah, there were spiders and snakes, I think. And I don't, once again, I don't remember all the numbers, but I think it's something like seven of the most deadly snakes in the world are in Australia. And since we were out in the middle of nowhere, they came, there was a couple that came around. I don't remember which kind. Uh, they were all, yeah, they were all protected as well, right? So you couldn't just kill them. Not that people didn't, because, when your dogs and your kids and stuff were around, people would, but they were all protected. And yeah, I guess the spiders, we didn't see too many spiders. I guess the spiders kind of stayed away from the populated areas, but supposedly there were tons of deadly spiders too. So
Gosh, it's interesting time then.
yeah, we
Just,
had
just,
fun with it.
yeah, just a couple of years you were there, you say, yeah?
Correct. Yeah, I was literally just under 2 years, I think. Let's see here. We moved over in, yeah, I guess it was mid-December, and we left in mid-December, so I think it was just about 2 years.
Right, and so your wife went over as well, yeah?
Correct. Yeah, we got married right before, and I guess that was part of the deal. So she got to experience life in the middle of nowhere while I was at work, so she was kind of bored most of the time.
I was going to say, what was her day-to-day thing? Was she not really doing anything?
No, not much. There was a local bank in town, Westpac, I think, was the Australian bank. So she worked there for a little while, I think. And there was a couple of other little odd things that she did, but she just tried to keep busy for a while and started up some hobbies and stuff. And we tried to travel as much as we could as well too. So I think out of those 2 years, I calculated it at one point, we were, and I don't remember the exact number of days, but it was something like 75 to 90 days, somewhere in there, that we were actually not in the town. The town was called Woomera. Um, and so that was driving down to Adelaide. 5 hours, is a long way for a road trip over a weekend, but we did that a few times, or we'd take 3, 4 day trips, go to Adelaide. We drove to Melbourne, which was fun. Like that was a long drive, but we drove to Melbourne. We flew to Sydney. We went up to Brisbane. We went up to the Gold Coast. We spent New Year's in Fiji one time. So yeah, we got all around. It was kind of nice.
You've kind of got to do it, haven't you, while you're there? You
Yeah,
can't not.
absolutely. Yeah, there were folks that really took advantage, and they went up to Thailand and Hong Kong. And this was still mid 90s, so Hong Kong was still the British Republic, right? So they got up there. There were folks that actually went to Beijing and got around in China as well. Because it's still a little bit of a longer flight, but not like it is from over here. So people did. And then, of course, the Australians loved going to Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur and that. So a handful of folks went up there at times too. So
Definitely, definitely do it while you can, because it may never happen again, kind of thing, isn't it? You
yeah,
take
exactly.
advantage of it. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So going back further then, Jason, I kind of ask a few people this, IT, was it the thing that you wanted to do when you were a kid, or did you have other aspirations?
Yeah, I don't know if I really had a direct aspirations. I always kind of liked doing architecture and that when I was kind of growing up, and more of the residential architecture. It quickly becomes clear though that there's, unless you're like a supreme architect, there's not a whole lot of money in that, and it's a pretty cutthroat business. Because you can, I mean, unless you're designing houses for like Hollywood stars or fabulously rich people, and that market's not very huge, right? Comparatively, there's not a ton of money in it, and there's not a huge amount of opportunity in it. So, but I'd always played with computers to a certain extent. I remember getting an Atari 800, I think. So way back, and just kind of dinking around on that, and kind of learning basic, and playing games and doing that kind of stuff, and so just kind of carried on from there.
Was the Atari 800 your kind of first exposure then to something like that?
I think so. I remember going over a friend's house before that, and they had an Atari 400. So, and I think that was the one with like the membrane keys, right? Those were kind of
Oh
crazy to
yeah,
type
yeah,
on. So
yeah.
that was more of a game machine for sure. You couldn't do a ton of nice typing, but
Yeah, I was kind of envious of the 400 or the one of those two. After having the VCR, the cartridge thing, it was like, oh wow,
right, right.
should I go for that? And I think my dad ended up buying my brother an Acorn Electron, which I don't know if you've heard of that one. It's
I heard, but I don't know if I've ever seen.
yeah, it's part of it's kind of the sister computer to the BBC Micro, which was kind of big. Again, I don't know if that was that big
No,
over in the States.
I don't think I'd ever heard of that one. That might have been something kind of unique to the UK there.
Yeah, tied in with the BBC, the British Broadcast Corporation. Yeah, so but it was kind of the start of computing for me, tinkering away with a few bits of coding, bit of Basic, BBC Basic was the name of the language built into that. But really for me, it was all about games as a kid. I wasn't much of a programmer, never really have been. So yeah, I don't know. Were yourself? Are you doing a little bit of coding, a little bit of programming?
Yeah, I've done a fair amount of coding. I mean, that led to my exposure to Uncle Sam, and really when I agreed to go into the military through what the program over here is called ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. And that's how they paid for my university. So I had to pick a major that they wanted me to pick, of course. So there was a short list of majors, and that was one that was on there. And of all the ones that I, had any interest in, it was computer science. Like, okay, yeah, that sounds good to me. And so I did have, a little bit of background in it, and so and computer science was heavily programming and coding. Um, so did that, and like I said, my first job in the Air Force was doing Oracle programming. So did a fair amount of that, and I still do a fair amount of different things today. So
Yeah, I had a quick look at on your LinkedIn, my 5 minutes of research, and uh, noticed that degree. And you went to the University of Michigan. So is that where you were brought up, Michigan way, or did you move to the university there?
yeah, so mostly from about the I guess age of whatever third grade is here. I guess eight. Is that eight? Yeah, it's about eight, nine, 10ish, somewhere in there. We settled down in Michigan. My father was in the U.S. Army, so they moved around quite a bit, and while I moved around a little bit with them, but my dad was in the Army well before I was born, so they moved around a lot more than I did. But so yeah, we settled in Michigan, and that was kind of the natural choice school to go to. So it wasn't too far from where we lived, just about an hour away. So
So as a kid, were you moving around a little bit then? Quite.
yeah, a little bit, not too much. We were in Germany for 5 years, but that was like I bits and pieces of memory because I was super small at that
Really,
point
really
in
young.
time.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
of
so
course.
and then I got 2 years in Kansas, and then my dad got out. So my brothers were everywhere though. So my brothers are about 10 years older than I was, and so they moved every 12 to 18 months. Particularly, my dad was in Vietnam for two tours as well, so they were off on their own with my mother while he was in Vietnam. So
Yeah, yeah. Disruptive, I suppose. At a younger age, but you didn't feel that effect too much then.
not really. I mean, I think it has different effects on every kid, right? So, and I think a lot of military kids they just kind of get used to it if they've grown up in it. And a lot of them become very extroverted, very outgoing, and they get a lot done in with that time, and they just learn to deal with it, and it just becomes part of who they are. So, but just like with everything, there are kids that don't react so well to it as well. So.
So when so obviously then you went in to do the bit with the stint in the Australia, so you were moving around again there as well, and then you're in you come back into the States, and you finished up doing that particular role with the military. So where did you move to next then? What was the next thing after that?
Yeah, so my wife was here from San Antonio, so the natural place, at least temporarily, was to come back here to San Antonio. So we lived with my in-laws for a couple of months as I was looking around trying to figure out what I was going to do. And there was a friend from before, from when I was stationed here initially, and her father was a contractor for the U.S. Air Force, and said, "Hey, we got a position available," and sounded like a fit. So I went and interviewed, and that was pretty much all she wrote for that. So I got that job, and that was my contracting job for the U.S. Air Force for about 5 years. So that's how that all got kicked off. And so that was an interesting time. So I got to see a lot of interesting things. Learned a lot of stuff. I think just about people in general, about because at that point we still didn't have kids. Actually, I had my first child while I was there, so that was a definite growing experience. And not being part of the military, right? The military is very regimented about a lot of things, and in every place it is. But then finally being free, I've always been kind of associated with the military to a certain extent, even living under my dad's roof. So um, and then just being on my own for really the first time, right? We it was just a growing experience, and when you're in your mid 20s and you're just kind of free to do whatever you want.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. I know that period. Fuzzy memories of that time. That's great,
Yeah,
great time. Yeah.
it seems like a lifetime ago at times for sure.
It does, it does. And then responsibilities kick in and things like that as we get a bit older. We mature with it as well. Um, yeah. So the config manager stuff then. I mean, you were involved quite early on with that then, were you? Kind of SMS days.
Yeah, that was that job right there. So they had SMS 2.0 stood up for that organization, and there was one guy on my team that kind of maintained it. So I started picking it up from him. And we're talking SMS 2.0, maybe this was 99. So I'm trying to think service pack levels at this point. I'm thinking service pack 3 or 4 at that point. I don't remember exactly. So not the greatest heyday of SMS for folks that go back that far. It worked, but it wasn't the greatest thing. So there was a fair amount of learning and a decent learning curve at that point, even. So picked it up. He left about a year later to become a rapid response engineer for Microsoft. So at that point, it all kind of fell on. Maybe it was more than a year. Maybe it was about 2 years. But at that point, it all kind of fell on me. So, and we were on an engineering team, so I wasn't doing day-to-day administration. I was just doing engineering. So that was kind of, I got a chance to play around and learn everything at the same time. So that's where that all really started. And so I got deep into SMS at that point in time, which was good.
So what about the community side of things though? So when did that kick in? Was that around that time?
Yeah, I don't, God, thinking back, I think the community itself was just being born at that time, but I definitely wasn't involved. I mean, there were things like Swink, which I don't even remember what it stands for, SWYNCK. Um, yeah, it was the precursor to my IT forum. Um, so that was around, and my IT forum kind of popped up in those days as well. But I don't remember exactly when it was. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, the forum for everybody, even at that point, right? The internet was relatively new for everyone in business and that, and right, that TechNet wasn't even on. Actually, I think TechNet had just transitioned to being online at that point in time. Got to remember all the knowledge base and things like that. And those are the fun days of IT where you just kind of guessed and prayed and because there was nothing online, right? I mean, nobody was blogging, no one was doing any of those kinds of things. So if you didn't know, and it was buying books, right? I mean, I still have stacks of books, and I've probably thrown away twice as many books over the years, or thrown them in the recycle bin at least. Of stuff that just doesn't matter anymore because I can either find it online or just for old
Sort of
stuff that doesn't
obsolete.
matter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
So do you kind of remember that getting involved in the community early on though, or is that kind of
yeah, it definitely wasn't there when I was a contractor. So I took that first consulting job. And that lasted for about 2 years. And there was a little bit of, I wasn't part of the community at that point. I kind of followed it, but even then, right, it wasn't. I mean, I guess it was because I remember going to my first MMS in that period when I had that first consulting job in the in Mandalay Bay in Vegas. Was the first MMS. that I went to, and I
What
remember that
what year
was
would
the
that be, Jason? Do you remember?
it was the Wall of Fire one. It was, I want to say it was 2000, 2003-ish maybe. I'm trying to think. I think it was after my first daughter was born, but before my second. So I think it was 2003-ish. And I think that was there had been a couple of MSs before that, but that was the first one that I went to. There was also the Windows IT Pro magazine. I don't know if they had that over there in the UK or not, but they had a bi-yearly conference as well. That there was, it was the IT Dev Connections, which they kind of tried to revive here a couple of years ago, and then they had a few again. So that was kind of my introduction, and getting introduced to a handful of people and meeting some folks, and getting into that. But didn't really contribute a lot until my next job. So from there, after 2 years, there were some things that didn't agree with me with that consulting company that I was with for a lot of different reasons. So left, took an FTE job for about 18 months with another organization, and that's when I started getting into community, and I started learning about the MVP program, and it's kind of funny. At one point, I was just like, I think I want to be an MVP, at that point I wasn't specializing in SMS either. At that organization, I did a little bit. I did a fair amount at that consulting job, and I started doing a little bit at this organization. I introduced it to the organization, and we started using it. But I didn't really know at that point in time. Just was trying to contribute as much as possible, which still wasn't a whole lot, and it was all my IT form at that point in time. So we started going down that path. Then another job at another consulting place popped up. Trying to think. Oh, there's a guy from my other consulting job that went to this new consulting place that recommended me, and so I went in for an interview, and one thing led to another. So I hopped on there, and that's where I met Cameron Fuller. So folks that are familiar with the MVP community, and Ops Manager in particular are familiar with Cameron. So Cameron was at Catapult. That was the new consulting company. And I knew he had been doing some authoring, and we got to talking one day, and I was like, hey, if anything comes up, or I'd be happy to contribute. Um, and so he Carrie Myler was the main author on the Ops Manager books, and so she coincidentally at that point, and I had no idea at this point. So I guess this could be another one of those divine intervention moments that I've had many of in my life that I couldn't explain, or I could never have planned for. You can attribute it to whatever you want, but I'll just definitely call them divine intervention. That they were doing a config manager book, the first one, the 2007 Unleashed book,
Oh, okay.
and their lead author dropped out because he was going off to do some other things in his personal life. So I won't throw him under the bus, but he knows who he is. So thank you to him as well, because
Yeah.
without him, I wouldn't have had that in. And so that was my first into really doing anything super in depth. And so I picked up a couple chapters in that book. The other folks on that book included folks like Greg Ramsey. God, I think who else was on that book? It was me, Greg. I'd have to even look. I think I have it on my shelf over here, but oh well. Um, and so that was kind of my in, and that, and the other thing, and Carrie was responsible for this as well. Is she's like, so do I think you're probably good material for being MVP. Do you monitor the TechNet forums? And I was like, no, I never even thought about going there and doing anything, because I had been doing the IIT forums, but I hadn't been doing TechNet. She's like, well, you should do the TechNet forums. And so that's when I started, diving into the TechNet forums. And then, so based on mainly those two things, those contributions, and the book, that led to somebody. I know at least one person that nominated me. I don't know if anyone else did, but that nomination led to me getting my MVP. So, and then it was all uphill from there, because then my contributions just started going up and up and up as far as the community pieces. So.
Yeah. So I mean, TechNet forums. I mean, you're an absolute legend, really, on those. I mean, looking at the stats, it's unbelievable, really. Um,
Yeah, that's my OCD kicking in. I can't leave things alone at times. Um,
yeah.
and I don't know. It's one of those I really, really. There's really two folds to it, right? I get to see and hear and attempt to solve a lot of things that I would have never. I'm not even close to, right? That I would have never seen, that I would have never talked about, that I would have never had any inkling about that even existed. So there's a lot of things like that I know about through kind of living vicariously through other folks who have either had the issue or faced a challenge that I've never even, thought about it at a customer or for myself. So that's one piece of it. And I don't know if that's the main piece of it or not, but it's definitely there, and it's one of the reasons I think I just and I retain a lot of this stuff as well, good for good, bad, or indifferent. I do retain a lot of it. So
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, really. So, I mean, I can retain for so long, but do you have like a photographic memory
uh,
at certain?
I don't think so, but I mean, I don't have like a mind palace. If you've seen like Sherlock and or The Mentalist, right? They talk about this mind palace, and I do think that's a real concept, but I don't know how it works. I definitely don't do anything like that. But I don't memorize things either. I think my main key is I remember where to find things, and so in a way that kind of I guess is the mind palace technique, right? Because if you've ever heard them like talk about it in either of those shows, they both talk about it. It's kind of funny where they create literally a palace, and then they create
Mm,
rooms, and they know where they've stored that information in which room, and so now when they think about that room, they can recall that information that's associated with that room. Well, I don't use a palace metaphor, but I remember, oh yeah, it was on so and so's blog, right? It was on so and so's blog, or this was here, and so I don't have to even remember the article title. I just know that, assuming it's a decent blog, they have a decent search engine, and I can go
yeah,
find it.
you can
So,
find it. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
And so trying to memorize is a goat rope. That's it just doesn't.
Yeah. I, I mean, for me, I mean, I've not been on there for a little while, and I've been slacking, and I keep dipping back in every so often. But when I was really piling on the points, it was a total learning experience as well as sharing the knowledge that you already knew, which is exactly what you're saying, isn't it? You may not know it completely, but you'll go off and check it out,
Right.
and you'll be able to provide that answer, and therefore you then learn from it. And you might retain that, or even if you don't retain it, you may search for it down the line and find that you actually answered that question with that particular answer.
Yep.
Um, and that's it. It just enriches it, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%, um, and you find out what you don't know as well, and I think that's kind of part of learning, right? You're not learning things that you do know, of course, but there's been more than one case where people are like, "No, you're wrong," and I'll be like, "Well, yes, I am right," and "No, you're wrong," and here's kind of the tip of the iceberg, and be like, "Oh, interesting," and then I go off, and a lot of I think some of my better blog posts that I've had over the years are because of people calling me out and saying, "No, you're wrong," and so I go digging deeper. And figure out, oh, okay, well, here's what's really going on, and here's why I was maybe just a little bit right, or here's why I was completely wrong, right? And that's totally valid, right? And I think it's one thing that I think everyone has to learn over time, and I certainly had to learn was standing up and saying, "Yep, I was wrong. I was either being an idiot or I just didn't know any better, and here's why I was wrong." Because sometimes the why you're wrong is important too, right? Because it helps you figure out exactly what you were missing, and it helps other folks figure out what they were missing as well, and why they're interpreting things wrong. And now, when that same or a similar scenario comes up, you can properly interpret it and come to the correct answer, the correct conclusion. Then, so there's a lot of value in that. So,
And you will particularly remember those occasions where you did get it wrong, because you go, "Ah, I remember this now because thought it was this and it was actually that," and
yeah,
it just enriches everything. Like I say, it really helps. If someone is wanting to become an expert as such in the field, then it's worth then once they're dabbling, dipping into the forums and trying to answer those questions. And I mean, that's exactly what I did, really, to try and gain more knowledge over time. Definitely recommend it.
yeah. And then I mean, there's value, of course, for the community here as well. I think that's the other thing. I think, and not to be egotistical about it or big-headed about it, but I think I've had a hand in a lot of folks' success over the years. Folks that I've never met, I've never, explicitly interacted with, but I've helped them be successful in managing their config manager and their Windows environments in general.
I agree. I agree. I mean, your name was one of the first names in the community I would have known. I think Niall probably would have been another, um, because of that visibility of yourself answering those questions. If I get stuck on something, I'm going to search for an answer. and no doubt may find you at least contributing, if not getting the answer right. So,
Right.
you know, that make it gives huge benefit to anyone. As you say, it's giving back to people, isn't it? That your knowledge and your
Yeah.
ability, or even if it's not something you knew, that you found that answer for them, for
Yep.
sure. I mean,
Yeah.
my claim to fame is that I was the proud person to accept or to mark the answer as correct when it took you over your 200,000 mark. So I was dead chuffed about that because
Hey.
I think I was thinking, well, this is imminent. I don't know how many points you're on now, but I'm on about 18,000, so it's it's pretty dire, really.
Yeah. Well, it's all going to go away anyway, so that's okay. Because we're switching over to the Q&A platform. For the Intune ones are already lit up right now, and the Config Manager ones are lighting up next month. And then there'll be a hard cutover where I guess it doesn't go away because they're making all of the TechNet stuff read only, but it is all shifting over to the Q&A platform.
Do we
Um,
get points?
um, you can go out to there are some forums on the Q&A platform already, but I didn't actually pay attention to whether you get points or not, right? And so I honestly don't know if those are there or not. Clearly, it's not something I've ever explicitly paid attention to. Yeah, I have points, but it is what it is, right? So,
You've got a few. Just have a look. Yeah, it's built up slightly.
yeah,
So like going back to that first MVP award, then, Jason. So you got nominated, you got made MVP, and so how did that feel?
that was
Sort of you
pretty
achieved
cool.
what
At
you
the
wanted.
No, yeah, that was really. Uh, I don't know if achievement's really the right word here. It's something that I'm super proud of achieving and super proud of being a part of for so long as well. And with my move to Microsoft, it was something that I discussed with so Dan's the guy who brought me out of Microsoft and is my current manager too. Something that he and I discussed, and because it was such a big part of my at least professional identity. And it seeped into my personal identity at times, right? I mean, it's hard not to, but it was definitely, the
Mhm.
core pillar of my professional identity. And so for me to lose that, I mean, losing is not really the right word here either, but to move on from that, I guess, it's definitely been a little bit of a shift. And so that was a big discussion I had, and I think, and that in of itself just tells you how valuable that was to me. And I guess a lot of people don't realize that one of the reasons it is so valuable is because of the relationships I formed because of it. um, knowing getting to I would have never met you. I would have never met Kim. I think Kim's one of the greatest people that I know, and Kent is clearly the greatest person I know. For folks that have never met Kent, that's a pretty much universal statement for everyone who's ever met Kent. um, and getting that different perspective on life, um, because the MVP community is definitely not just about tech. Yeah, we talk a lot of tech, we talk a lot of things like that, but there are clearly tons of other conversations as well, and tons of other experiences that we've shared. And
'Cause you're all of a sudden you're giving up the kind of summit week, aren't you? That interaction there, or it's or it's in a different way maybe. Because I've seen you still involved on we have the monthly calls. You're still involved there.
yeah,
I see you
absolutely.
connected. You're obviously vocal on the email list that we have as well.
Right. In a way, for me, it's been an evolution, because I've been able to maintain that. Partly because after 12 years, I've formed some pretty strong relationships with people, so that's a good piece. But as my role in Microsoft now, I'm able to maintain those relationships as well for slightly different reason. But the relationships are still have tons of value for me personally, as well as Microsoft, right? And so I'm still able to participate. And even unfortunately, everything's been canceled this year. But the MVP
Yeah.
summit itself this year, I was planning on being there, right? And no one, everyone's like, cool, that's great, and no one had any heartburn with it. And in reality, it still just continues to enhance things. So because I think one of the cool things, so the position I'm in now, right, for Microsoft is really about, the MVPs are about being an independent liaison between customers and Microsoft. Clearly, I'm not independent anymore, but I'm still a liaison between customers and Microsoft. So, um, uh, although I get to be deeper and I get to do some things in a different way, I get to peel back the curtains. I can see the wizard behind the curtain in a lot of places, which I never had access to some of that. But at the same time, I had some of it, and I had still some of that visibility. So it's really an evolution of a role for me. So that's really been part of the cool part. Is yeah, I had to drop that MVP tag officially, but in a way, those relationships are still there, and I've gotten to form a lot of cool new relationships as well too. I've met some just totally fantastic people as well. So
Yeah, it's kind of coming into it at a different angle. You're seeing even further behind the scenes. You're in there now, and you're one of these people. There's a few of them who've gone and made the move to Microsoft who've continued with the blogging, kept putting themselves out there rather than just going, okay, I'm not an MVP anymore. I don't need to do that. Or
right.
it's obviously ingrained in them as something they do. Pear's one of those people, for example, and Steve Hoskins as well, who've kept that community thing going even after that move to Microsoft.
Yeah, for sure. It's still a piece of Microsoft's core identity as well. That I think luckily, I don't know about luckily, but it was an oft piece of conversation with some of the folks that I was talking to before taking the job and even since taking the job. Folks that have been around for longer than Satya's tenure as CEO, is the culture that was in Microsoft under the previous CEOs, really one in particular. So um, the culture was not always the greatest, and there are a lot of people who I think most people in Microsoft are very happy that that time is no longer there. They value those experiences. They're happy they went through them, but they're very happy they're in the past as well. Um, but at the same time, and so really the culture even then though, and big time now is really focused on making sure that um, what we do is the best thing we can do, and the whole purpose of the team that I'm on now is getting that information from the customers and figuring out what that means and how we need to make our products better. Um, and that's just a huge pillar, right? And I think that's what the MVPs have always been about as well, is right. Let's make everything better for the customers. Now, the MVPs are directly there implementing things. I'm no longer implementing things directly for customers, although I do sit with them. I see their pain. So there's a lot of parallels still. So
No, it's interesting. It's interesting to hear your side, on making that move and how that changes for you. Um, so, Jason, we can't do this podcast without talking football. let's let's move on to football or soccer, as you call it.
absolutely. No, no, no. I don't call it soccer. Only when I have to folks that are ignorant of how a ball actually hits a foot, or when the
Exactly.
ball actually hits the foot, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a massive match tonight. Yeah, it's as you know, it's Brentford v Barnsley.
I thought Barnsley had already been relegated.
Oh no, no, you've not kept up with it.
No, I don't follow the championship. I except for at the top, I
No,
saw that Leeds got promoted, and that was about it.
no, don't. They're our rival team, or a rival team, based,
Sure.
10, 12 miles away. No, I looked early. I think you've got West Ham, haven't you, tonight?
Yes.
But I think is that an irrelevant match again? I don't look at the Premier League because it's irrelevant to me. Is it you're a bit? Have you got a chance to get into Champions League, or are you on the edge of that? Or
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So if United win against West Ham, and then I think they can come away with even depending upon the goal difference because they're even on goal difference with Leicester right now. And then they win their last game against Leicester, then they're into the Champions League, no problem. Um, and of course, Chelsea has to play Liverpool. I don't know if that's
that's
today.
tonight as well? Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
tonight. Yeah, yeah.
So depending upon whether, because they're all kind of almost level on points. I think Chelsea has 2 points on both Leicester and Man U right now.
So come on then. What were your thoughts on Liverpool winning though?
Um,
You're not going to comment on that, no.
yeah, I mean they're clearly at least pre-break, right? And over the past 16 to 18 months, they were clearly the most efficient team in the world, and the team with some of the best talent in the world as well, right? I don't think anyone would deny Virgil van Dijk and the three forwards just combined so well, and individually those three forwards aren't necessarily the top of the heap, but together they were clearly the best in the world, right? So um, they haven't shown that over the past few games, but
Yeah, well, I think they afforded themselves such a luxury, hadn't they, with the amount of points they got that,
yep.
yeah, they didn't. I mean, they've done it now. So I take it at that point, talking about Kent, did you hear from Kent when that happened?
No, no, no. He knows. Well, he typically gloats a fair amount, particularly because he hadn't been able to gloat for a long, long time previous to this last about 24 months. No, but he's the first to show off his Liverpool socks, and he stole my daughters at a conference one time and put them into Liverpool jerseys and forced them to take pictures too. So that was
Child
underhanded and
cruelty, that is
devious.
it?
Exactly. I was we were in Denmark though, so it was not a whole lot I could do. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And when you came over to England last time, when you did the W Mug, did you go to Old Trafford that time, or was it
no, we
a
went
different
to
match?
yeah, we didn't want to take the train. Yeah, we went to Wembley and we saw City and Tottenham. So that was a big match that night. It was pretty cold though, since it was an evening match, and but it was fun. Wembley's super cool. We took a tour of Wembley. I think the last time we were in England with my daughters, and so it was kind of cool to go into a game itself at Wembley. Wembley's an impressive place, and so it was a good game. It was a decent game. So
Have you been? Was that the first time you'd been then? When you did the tour?
yeah, when we did the tour, it was the first time to Wembley. Yeah, so
Oh, okay. So here's my claim to fame. Back in the 90s, I used to work uh, at Wembley Stadium occasionally, at the old one, selling hot dogs in
nice.
the hot dog stand. Yeah. It's awful. It really is. Well, it's not too bad. We used to give the stewards free hot dogs to be able to stand and watch games from the area that you weren't supposed to stand. So we got
Sure.
to see a couple of England Brazil, I think, with Paul Gascoigne playing back
Oh,
then.
nice.
A few playoff finals that were very interesting. I think Tranmere Reading, I think, might have been one of them, which sounds awful, but it's something like a 4-3 match. But the worst time there was we did a Rod Stewart concert, and effect yeah, it was oh god, I can't remember. The support act was terrible. But anyway, we were there from about 10 o'clock in the morning, and they opened about midday, and it went through right till almost midnight.
Oh,
And
that's a long day.
opening, you weren't allowed to serve beers with the lid on, so we had to open the bottles with our hands, which starts off okay, but then
Right.
you start to get a bit of a burn sensation on your hand, and then it becomes really difficult, and it's awful. And by about 3 hours in, it's just a sea of people coming at us all the whole time. Um, yeah, one of the worst experiences I've had for working there. But we got, as I say, got to see some free games and stuff, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's
Um,
nice.
I got served a Rod Stewart look-alike as well, which was unless it was Rod, who knows? Um, yeah, so it's pretty much changed. I mean, I love the old Wembley. I love the Twin Towers and all that, but I think it's missing that uniqueness. I mean, even it's got the arch, it's still not the
Yeah, the
same.
arch is pretty impressive. It's pretty cool. It's very distinctive.
It is, but the Twin Towers seem to, for some reason, have that little extra to it.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a pretty impressive stadium, to be honest. And I've actually watched Barnsley lift up a cup there. It was the Johnson's Paint Trophy, that classic.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever watched any of those matches.
So the Johnson's Paint Trophy, if you don't know, is for anyone who's in League One and Two that's competing.
Ah,
So yeah, I never thought in my lifetime I'd see Barnsley pick up a trophy at Wembley, but there you go.
hey.
You know, grown man crying. We've done it. We've got the Johnson's Trophy. So yeah,
Nothing wrong with
it's a
that.
biggie tonight. A biggie for us tonight. So we aren't relegated yet, but we probably will be tonight. We play Brentford, who are battling to get promoted into the Premier League, um, and then we can only catch up to the team who are fourth from the bottom, which is Charlton, and they play Leeds. And also, Charlton is where I live, and it's my eldest favourite team. So there's a little bit of rivalry going to be going on tonight between us. It's going to be interesting. I pretty much am convinced we're not going to make it, and we're going to be back to League One. But it's all fun, isn't it? That's all part of it. The ups and the downs,
Yeah, I mean, no team is going to win everything. I mean,
particularly
unless
not
y
Barnsley.
yeah, I mean, even Barcelona, right? They're in, and the funny thing is, Barcelona being in crisis means that they finished second, right? So and Madrid, right? They clearly have an up year, but still, they didn't have such a great year last year, and they've had their issues. So there are very few teams. I guess Juventus has been on a pretty good streak, at least domestically, but
It's
still.
Ronaldo playing there, though, isn't it?
Yeah, he is, but I don't know if he's extended after this year or not. I hadn't followed that explicitly because there's rumors of him now that Beckham owns a team over here in the U.S. in Miami, Miami United. Is it Miami United? Yeah, Miami. I think it's Miami United. No, it's not United. It's something else. But anyway, since he's a proprietor of that team, there's been rumors of Ronaldo coming over. There's been rumors of Messi coming over because Messi's not too happy with Barcelona right now. I don't think either of those will explicitly happen. But funny thing, Ibrahimovic came over for a couple of years, played for in LA, and now he's back into Serie A. And there's a couple of other folks over here now. I mean, most folks are a lot of them are towards the end of their career, but at this point, until there's a handful of U.S. players that are really becoming prominent right now. Right, Pulisic is probably one of the most informed players in the EPL right now. So in the Premier League, so he scored a fabulous goal against City.
I think we were chatting about this back at the summit about the football in the States, and I think you were saying the attendances are pretty decent in the American League.
Yeah, definitely. MLS has picked up, and there are places like Seattle in particular. Seattle has a team, and they won the MLS Cup last year. They're they draw 60 to 70,000 people in their games. So there's a handful of other places: Kansas City, Portland. I think New York Red Bull pulls fairly big crowds consistently. Most of them pull fairly big crowds consistently, and so it's growing big time here. Um,
Definitely. I mean,
and
what Barnsley would give for 70,000 fans to rock up one day and attend. I think we're 12,000, 14,000.
yeah,
Um,
well, that's still pretty big for a lower league team, though, right? I mean, you've got places like Bournemouth, whose stadium doesn't even seat that many, and they're in the top tier, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we built our stadium up with the Premier League money and things like that, and we've still got one section of it though. It's built in the 1950s. It's brilliant. It's like the old school. As a kid, there's this white wall that goes around part of the pitch, and as a kid, this was one you used to sort of put your head over to watch the match when
Sure.
you go down the front. And looking at it now, I mean, it must come up to my knees or something, or my thighs, maybe. It's like tiny. But as a kid, I mean, the first match I saw was Barnsley v Shrewsbury, 1981. They'd just come up from what was the old Division Three, it's now League One, into the Division Two, now the Championship. Um, and my dad took me down, and we beat Shrewsbury 4-0, and that was it. And I'm not a hardcore fan, but that was me sold. I suddenly had my team to support, and it was a bit of the golden period. The '81 season was renowned for being quite a big one for Barnsley and a good squad. We had, I suppose, a player you might know is Mick McCarthy. who managed Republic of Ireland for a while.
I think the
Um,
name's probably familiar, but yeah, that goes back before my time of following a lot of non-US sports.
Right. He took over. So Jack Charlton, who died recently, was the
Right.
manager of Republic of Ireland at the '94 USA World Cup, and then I think Mick took over just after that. But he was a defender for Barnes. He went off to play for City, Man City. Um, but a bit of a golden period for us that, and a good time to kind of become a supporter as well. So for yourself then, so when did you get into it then? The Man U in particular, you became a fan of them straight away, was it?
Yeah, so it was mainly after I mean, I'd followed a little bit, but it was the 2014 World Cup that really sold me on everything. And I'm not sure, I guess, because it was on this half of the hemisphere, right? I mean, it was in Brazil, so all the games pretty much went on during the daytime here. I was working. I don't even know what customer I was working with, but I pretty much was able to watch literally almost every game. It was kind of insane. And I think the Man U really came from, and it was kind of interesting because it's not like he was a lifelong Man U player, but he's still revered is Robin van Persie. And watching their opening game against Spain, right? And Spain was clearly the incumbent that year. They had won in 2010, and they were just a super powerhouse at that point. But watching the header that came in from good lord, I can see his face, but I can't remember the other winger that played for Bayern. And watching his header go over Iker Casillas was just a phenomenal moment. And from that point on, I was sold on him and Menu, and so that was, and then of course, I don't know how much was televised before that. I think a little bit was televised before that, but not a ton was here in the US as far as EPL goes. But I think that was one of the turning points as well as for the EPL getting shown here on a regular basis as well. So
Right, right. Was that the World Cup when Germany beat Brazil about seven
yes,
nil or something? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it was
7 or 9 0, wasn't it?
7-1. Yeah,
Seven
someone I
one.
don't
Yeah.
remember who there was. It might have been. I don't think no, because Neymar was hurt. I don't remember. Someone put in a goal late, so I don't remember who it was. So yeah, that was an interesting time.
It definitely was. We were kind of sat there going, "My God, this is slightly embarrassing," and particularly being the hosts as well. And it was
Oh
Germany who
yeah,
went on and won that one, wasn't it? Was it?
yeah. They beat Argentina 1-0. Mario Götze Mario Götze put in the winning one in there. So
Yeah. See, my memories of World Cup start in 1978 with
yeah,
the
you've got a lot more.
Argentinian one. Yeah, and but I get to about 98, and I can't remember from then on. I seem to have this long-term memory about the matches. It's all blended into one now. Because England have been so poor really since '98. Apart from we got to the semi-finals in the last one, which didn't seem exciting to me. I kind of got bored of it.
We were actually in Paris for the beginning of the World Cup this last time. So that was kind of fun. Yeah, there was a lot of Parisians out and very happy. That was at the beginning though. It wasn't near the end. So I did pick up a French jersey though. It only has 2 stars on it though, so I need to. So that was, but I kind of knew that was coming. At least that was the path for me. I figured that was going to happen. So, but we were in Amsterdam near the end of it, and I think England was still in it, and the pubs were packed. And we were walking around during one of the England games, and I don't remember. It was probably Harry Kane that scored, and the whole city pretty much erupted because there were a lot of English folks in
Yeah.
Amsterdam at the time.
I remember the 1990 World Cup. Obviously, for the English was a big one with Gascoigne, and we went in there with absolutely no thoughts of getting anywhere really. And the team that Bobby Robson, the manager, hadn't really defined the lineup and the configuration of the team, the formation. Sorry. And so, we weren't expecting anything at all, but then we ended up in the semi-finals. Um, so the whole nation was like buzzing at the time. And remember that particular night, we'd gone to our friends. His dad ran a pub, so we were drinking beers and watching the match. And his dad, being a tight northerner, so we were renowned in Yorkshire for being tight with our money, said that he would, if Germany win. he was it if Germany would win, he would take 10 pence off a beer. And then something like that. It was like we were
It's
like,
not a whole
so
lot.
okay, so wait a minute, we've got to start cheering for the Germans now, so we can get some reduction in beer. This is not on, terrible. And then we lost, and we were gutted, and we ended up in the classic night in Japanese Whispers discotheque nightclub in Barnsley, singing, dancing away to New Order's "World in Motion" song. Great night. but
Nice.
um, but yeah, like I said, I remember so much more about these older World Cups. Obviously, we've got '86 where Maradona's famous hand of God
Yep.
against our dread. Peter Shilton in the net's dreadful. I mean, he's a goalie. He can jump up, and this little tiny guy gets above him. But I mean, then you've got to credit him for his second goal, which was just pretty
Sure.
outstanding, really. But I also have a memory of coming home from school in '82, and I think it was Brian Robson, our captain, scored after about it's not 6 seconds. It's something ridiculously quick. I just turned the telly on after getting home from school. Put my bag down and all that. Put the telly on, and we have a throw in. And next thing you know, we've scored. And those little moments, they stay with you forever. Obviously, I
Yes.
mean that's nearly 40 years ago. Crikey. And I even remember Archie Gemmell scoring for Scotland in '78 against Holland. And that's 42 years ago. It's like the other day. It's like the other day. Pretty scary. So when you started supporting Man U, then was Fergie still in charge?
Nope, that was just the year right after Fergie.
Right. Okay.
So
So
that
we can't see
was
you're a glory hunter then, can we? Really? Because it's been a struggle since then.
yeah, at times for sure. They've made some poor management decisions. They've bought some players they probably shouldn't have and spent lots of money on them. And yeah, they've had a few toxic personalities as well. So
Yeah.
um,
Does it feel a bit more settled this season? It's
yes
had
and
its
no. I mean,
moments.
until it goes back to Fergie, right? Which whether it will or ever, won't, who knows? But that's what everyone's kind of used to. So there's always a bit of unease unless they're, flying high and winning 3-0, 4-1,
Yeah.
scoring 5, 6 goals.
Yeah.
And so there's always that. But, at least we're not West Ham. So, and of course, I probably just jinxed them, right? Not that my words should have any universal consequences, but
Oh, wow. Well,
so
big matches tonight for both of us then, I suppose.
yeah.
The potential for better things in a way. I mean, for Man U then, you're looking at Liverpool, and it took them 30 years to retain the title. I mean, what are your thoughts on Man U's ability to do it, and do you think it's going to be years before they do it themselves?
They've they've got most of the players in place right now. I think they have a couple of things they really need to shore up and mentality wise, but part of that is them being somewhat young. Part of that is Ollie um, really trying to figure out how to get the best out of them all as well. There were a couple of pillars, at least in the second part of Fergie's career, right? In Vidic and Ferdinand, right? That you could count on them day in day out constantly, and they very rarely made mistakes. So um, and so he always had a platform to build on. So Ollie's got to find that right now. I think he has a platform up front, and now they've got it. He's working it kind of the different way. So we'll see. I don't know. I think coaches that were defenders or goalies have an advantage because they're used to seeing the entire field, and coaches that worked from the front or that were frontmen, they don't always have that view, and so I think they approach the game slightly differently. And I don't know. I don't. So I think in a way he's missing something, and so we'll see if that hurts the team. Folks that did start in the back, and they may not have necessarily been, even the greatest defenders in the world. And even if they were defenders, they still could be offensive minded when they coach because they saw everything in front of them. It was always in front of them. So I don't know. That could just be me, making things up too. So it's hard to tell. But I do think he's missing a small piece in what he's trying to do with the team because he never had to do that or deal with that as a player himself, and he needs to pick that up from someone else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd read a couple of good things about them since coming back from the break, and more consistent, more solid team. So that's a positive. And
Yep.
I don't. I mean, I was asking my eldest, when does the new season start again? I didn't. Have you any ideas?
I think it's September because well, we have the two games left this year or for this season in the EPL, but then Europa and Champions League start, uh, and FA Cup still has to finish as well. FA Cup only has the one game left now, but Europa is going to be a closed tournament somewhere in Germany. I don't remember where in Germany. And so I don't remember how long it's going to take them to finish out their games. They're all going to be single elimination now, though. And then I think Champions League was going to be in Spain, and that's going to be similar. It's going to be a closed tournament where all the teams just go to one location and play in Spain. And I think that's all in August. Those are both scheduled in August. So
Again, being a Barnsley fan, I hadn't noticed any of those fixtures. I hadn't, I hadn't seen them. Yeah, I've totally forgotten about that. So really, they could potentially be all, going straight through, couldn't they? And then kick-starting again.
yeah, I mean for some of the teams, that's a at least some of the players, right? Most of the international players, that wasn't overly unusual over the last few years because everyone has tournaments over the summer, right? You've got Copa in South America. Not that the Gold Cup drew tons of international players, especially from Europe, but the Gold Cup here in the U.S. happens every 2 years, and the European Championships were supposed to happen this year as well, right? So they would have mostly been playing through the summer anyway.
Mm. I suppose it's just forget about pre-season. Those kind of.
Right. They that's exactly they'll have about a month off, I think, in EPL, right? And so they'll kind of be going right back into it, and I don't think it'll be too big of a deal. So I think the big question is when they start letting crowds back in and spectators back in. So I don't know if that should happen anytime soon. It's really it's I've gotten used to watching the games without the crowds. I think I kind of like it because you can hear more things. A lot of the broadcasts, you have the choice here in the US, at least for the EPL, you can choose natural sound or they actually pipe in crowd noise, which I think is it's just weird, especially if you don't know it's something piped in, it's probably okay, but I know that it's not natural, so it's just stupid to listen to, so I never listen to it. But and you can hear the guys, shouting at each other. You can't always make out what they're saying, but you can hear them shouting, and you can hear the coaches shouting and that. So I think that's kind of an interesting aspect of the game that you never got before. So
What I loved on at the weekend was Barnsley won in the I think it was the 93rd minute, which kept us in the chase to avoid relegation, and the manager came sprinting onto the pitch to celebrate with the players, and I thought, "Well, that's different. That wouldn't normally happen. They'd be restricted.
right,
So it's a totally different feel. Obviously, there was no crowd to go crazy with, so he ended up running in there and having doing it himself. Slight pitch invasion from the
yeah.
manager.
I think a lot of the games have been cleaner as well. I don't see a lot of the kind of semi-malicious fouls, right? With the crowds going, they egg people on. People get their adrenaline going, and they stop thinking as much. And so, I don't see, there's been a handful of bad tackles. I think most of them have been kind of someone thinking they could do something and they can't and they couldn't. Whereas with the crowds, you can see he's out there. He's not necessarily trying to hurt someone. I mean, you can say that on occasion, but not necessarily trying to hurt someone. But he knows that what he's doing is he shouldn't be doing, and they do that when the crowd is there. But I don't think I've seen any really that I can think of tackles like that without the crowds there. So there clearly been some bad tackles. Guys thinking they could do something that they can't, but not just being purely malicious about it.
Well, it's a big night. It's a big night of action, and it's a do or die for us. So it'd be interesting to see. And by the time this podcast goes out, we'll know exactly where we stand.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so Jason, thanks ever so much for taking part in the podcast. It's been a real blast chatting with you, getting to know some little bits of info, interesting bits of info about yourself. I definitely didn't know before. And good luck against West Ham tonight. And I suppose living in Charlton, West Ham's a rival team, so I can kind of say that. Um, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see when we all get to meet up again. And it was a pleasure to have you over in London last year, wasn't it, for the Dutch pub? So
I think it was 2 years ago now. It's
was
been
it?
a while.
Jeez,
Yeah, I think it was.
God, time is flying. So
Yep.
if things are all kicking again and that, you're always welcome to come over and present again and things like
Yep.
that. It's a
You
pleasure.
just have to convince your government to let Americans in.
Oh yeah, and vice versa. Yeah, it's not happening much, is it? So yeah,
Nope.
absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thanks for taking part in the podcast.
Absolutely. It was awesome, Paul. Thank you very much.